The 112th session of Treaty Review unfolded as it always did, an orchestrated ballet of political posturing and procedural formalities. A cacophony of alien tongues filled the chamber, their voices buzzing in rhythmic patterns, casting an air of tedious inevitability over the proceedings. At the center of the massive amphitheater, the Galactic Council's representatives sat like statues, their forms frozen in contemplation, each delegate's face a mask of calculated indifference. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with the weight of millennia of interspecies politics. Hanging high above the council members, laser plasma displays projected the shifting sigils of the founding species. The Krell, sleek and sharp in their obsidian forms. The Dravari, their blue-plated figures unfolding in spirals. The Shandari, their crystalline bodies glowing with a muted luster. Each banner rippled in time with the slow hum of the chamber's climate systems, an ostentatious backdrop to the silent tension between the council members. Chancellor Damian Stewart of Earth sat near the edge of the room, his posture rigid yet controlled, observing the events unfold with a practiced detachment. His uniform was immaculate, a stark contrast to the colorful splendor of the others. His black attire marked him as a secondary figure in this political theater, a mere shadow amidst the more prominent species. He was a face among many, a participant without voice. To the others, he was little more than a formality, a representative of a species seen as too minor to matter. Councillor Hieros of the Krell clicked his mandibles in irritation, the sound like the sharp clatter of stones on stone. If the human delegation insists on pressing Article 9 to C, he muttered, barely audible, they must clarify the orbital jurisdiction of subcommercial lanes between exopoints EF4 and F7 within the Fen corridor. His words were a mere ripple in the stagnant pool of political procedure. The air thickened with quiet murmurs from other representatives, but none paid more than fleeting attention to the Krell's complaint. Earth's delegation has not submitted updated coordinates for over 6 cycles, came the voice of Councillor Remham of the Shandari Union, the crystalline shimmer of his body pulsing with an iridescent glow as he leaned forward. Perhaps they have finally learned to choose silence over stubbornness. He did not laugh, for the Shandari never did. His tone, though, was sharp, thinly veiled condescension wrapped in the guise of diplomacy. Another round of murmurs swept through the chamber. Few had ever seen the Earth representatives as a force to be reckoned with. Earth's role in the galactic landscape had been reduced to that of a secondary player, a participant whose presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. And yet, in this moment, something shifted beneath the surface, something that remained invisible but tangible, a quiet tension that was felt but not yet understood. The light in the chamber flickered for a moment, an unremarkable glitch, one that many had grown accustomed to. The technological underpinnings of the Galactic Council, while impressive, were far from infallible. The occasional flicker of the lighting system or the misalignment of a holographic display had long been written off as routine malfunctions. But in that brief, breathless moment of flickering darkness, something stirred. A low chime rang out from the perimeter of the dome, a soft, almost imperceptible signal that barely registered against the hum of the ongoing deliberations. Most of the delegates ignored it, their attention still divided between the ongoing procedural arguments. But then, the lights went out. The entire chamber fell into blackness. Holographic banners sputtered and flickered, their once pristine imagery warping into indecipherable static. The artificial gravity systems faltered for half a second, enough for every council member to feel the absence, to realize the shift in equilibrium beneath them. It was not chaos, no. It was something far subtler, something calculated. The room seemed to hold its breath. At the center of the chamber, one solitary projector activated with a sharp snap, its beam slicing through the dark, throwing a narrow path of light across the floor like a dagger of pure clarity. Then the silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the absence of intention, the deliberate quiet before something monumental. The image that formed on the projection was not filtered through council protocol. It did not carry the trademark seals of the Galactic Council's diplomatic registry. Instead, it bore the stark, cold insignia of Earth's government, a simple, unforgiving symbol, like a brand across the screen. The figure that appeared was instantly recognizable, even to those who had grown accustomed to dismissing Earth as insignificant. Chancellor Damian Stewart stood tall, his presence commanding despite the apparent simplicity of his appearance. There were no medals on his uniform, no ceremonial ribbons, no flourishes, only the weight of his posture, the starkness of his demeanor, and the calm precision of his voice. This is Chancellor Damian Stewart, representative of the United Earth Strategic Command. His voice rang out, cutting through the quiet. Effective immediately, the United Earth government severs all diplomatic ties with the Galactic Council. All human personnel have been ordered to evacuate, and all communication with council structures will cease upon conclusion of this transmission. A collective gasp filled the chamber, but it was not a sound. It was a collective shock, an unconscious moment of disbelief shared by every delegate present. The words reverberated in the minds of the representatives, but none dared to break the silence that followed. Stewart did not flinch. His voice remained steady, unwavering. The Treaty of Galactic Integration, he continued, was never ratified. We have obtained full documentation proving that the foundational species of this council manipulated procedural records, obstructed Earth's political voice, and maintained our presence under false pretense for strategic exploitation. As the words landed, the chamber seemed to freeze. Several delegates shot forward in their seats, their augmentations flashing with panic as they scrambled to send messages, to probe the communication systems. The feed remained solid, the transmission real, undeniable. Krell, Dravari, Shandari, none of them were prepared for this. None of them had foreseen the consequences of such a move. You simulations of equality were lies. Stewart's voice cut through the ensuing chaos, its tone as unyielding as the stone of the council chamber itself. Your votes were coordinated theater. Your partnership, fraud. With a swift motion, a Krell advisor leapt from his seat, his movements frantic as he gestured toward the technical staff. No reply, he shouted. No response from the relay. This is not a rogue transmission. A Dravari representative leaned forward, her eyes wide with a sudden realization. They've cut themselves out. And in that moment, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The lights dimmed further, and the weight of Earth's message settled heavily over the Council like an unavoidable storm cloud, dark and oppressive. The Galactic Council had always assumed Earth to be weak, pliable, a tool to be used. But now they saw the truth. The chamber remained in stunned silence as the final echoes of Chancellor Stewart's broadcast hung in the air. The delegates, still frozen in disbelief, had yet to process the weight of what had just transpired. A moment ago, the Galactic Council had been the epitome of order and routine. Now it was a fractured entity, its complacency shattered by the calculated defiance of a single species. Chancellor Stewart's words reverberated through the chamber like a cold slap, but the room was slow to react. The technological disruptions were swift and precise, but the emotional fallout was taking longer to settle. Some delegates sat motionless, their eyes locked on the central display, as though they hoped the image would vanish or somehow be a mistake. Others exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to respond to the unprecedented move. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, like the cracking of a dam, the voices began to rise. What do you mean, severs all diplomatic ties? Councillor Varin of the Dravari asked, his tone sharp, almost accusing. His elongated arms twitched as if he couldn't contain the anxiety that was building inside him. This must be a rogue transmission. Earth doesn't have the authority to... His words were cut off by the unmistakable sound of his own comm system blinking erratically. The voice of his aide broke in, urgent and frantic. Counselor, we've just lost contact with the human embassy on Palin Prime. They've initiated full evacuation protocols. The entire station's been wiped from the network. A ripple of panic surged through the room. The calm bureaucracy of moments before was now replaced by a frantic energy, each representative scrambling to understand the gravity of the situation. Ambassador Lear of the Tillin, towering over the others with bark-textured skin and eyes that reflected the shifting lights of the room, stood up slowly. His voice, deep and resonant, carried the weight of someone who had seen 1,000 crises. Is this real? He asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the central display, where Earth's transmission had just ended. Are we witnessing the beginning of something far worse than we realize? Counselor Atris Dar of the Uran Confederacy, his translucent wings flickering with nervous energy, turned to the chamber's techs. Initiate a full scan. Find out if this is a manipulation of our systems. His voice was strained, but there was an edge to it, a warning to anyone who might doubt the seriousness of Earth's actions. But the technicians' replies came back with an unsettling truth. We're locked out. All communication with Earth's systems is severed. No access to the archives, no response from any relay. It's as if Earth has erased itself from our network entirely. The chamber was becoming a cacophony of voices, each alien species reacting in its own way. The Dravari turned inward, their many eyes scanning their internal systems for any signs of sabotage. The Krell began hissing, the sharp clicks of their mandibles echoing through the hall as they demanded immediate action. Some in the council began to doubt, others began to panic, and a few began to wonder if Earth had orchestrated this entire event years in advance. I told you Earth was dangerous, Counselor Varel of the Shandari muttered under his breath, his crystalline body pulsing as he stood rigid in his seat. They were never just another species to be controlled. The words fell into the room like stones dropped into a well. For a brief moment, the sounds of scrambling aides and technical personnel filled the air, but the council members were too distracted to hear. Their minds were spinning with the same question. Why? Why had Earth taken such a drastic step? And more importantly, what did it mean for them? Chancellor Stewart didn't just sever ties, Counselor Morn of the Krell said with an air of sudden clarity. He wiped us out. Clean. No records, no traces. And the silence. I feel it. His mandibles clicked once more, this time with a tremor of realization. This wasn't a political move. It was a declaration, and it's far more dangerous than we ever imagined. Their power has always been subtle, Counselor Salk of the Kalari Dominion added, his thick-scaled hands gripping the sides of his chair. His voice shook, a rare sign of vulnerability. They weren't just present in the Council's systems. They were the systems. The realization settled over the room like a dense fog. Earth had not just participated in galactic politics. It had woven itself into the very fabric of the Council's infrastructure. It had been an invisible hand guiding the gears of the Council's machinery for centuries, its quiet manipulation masked by its status as a secondary player. But now Earth had withdrawn, not out of weakness, but as a calculated move. A move that left the Council vulnerable, exposed to the very chaos they had been too blind to see. A tense silence followed, broken only by the continued frantic voices of technical staff as they confirmed the full extent of Earth's withdrawal. Counselor Dar, the first to break the quiet, let out a bitter laugh. They always knew, didn't they? They knew what we were too blind to see. We thought we had control, but we were merely puppets. What's next? Counselor Lyer asked, his voice calm but undercut with fear. How do we respond to this? They've cut us off. We've lost access to their systems, their fleets, their networks. They've left us adrift. We don't respond yet, Counselor Dar said, his voice calm but with a strategic edge. First, we must understand what we're dealing with, and then we must figure out how to survive without them. But even as he spoke, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on the Council. The galaxy was teetering on the brink of something monumental, and no one knew how deep Earth's plan ran or how far its reach extended. The tension in the chamber grew as the implications of Earth's actions became clear. Earth had not simply withdrawn from the Council. It had abandoned the galaxy itself, leaving a void that would take years to fill. The Council was no longer in control of its own systems, its own destiny. The loss of Earth's quiet influence was felt in every corner of the galaxy, and the realization set in that the balance of power had shifted in ways no one could yet comprehend. What are we facing? The voice of Counselor Morn of the Dravari cut through the air, his tone low but urgent. Have they left us defenseless? How do we stop them from pulling the galaxy apart? I don't think we stop them, Counselor Sulk said quietly, his voice barely audible. I think we just hope they don't finish what they've started. The council chamber fell into disarray. Panic began to spread through the room as representatives of the various species scrambled to regain control. Councils of war, peace, and diplomacy had never anticipated a day when their communications would be silenced. The holographic screens flickered intermittently before failing completely. What remained was a stillness that no one was prepared for. Counselor Tassar of the Krell, his claws nervously tapping against the armrest, opened a comms link to the central hub. The usual blue glow of the plasma displays sputtered as his attempts were met with silence. There was no response. The signal was gone, and the screens, which had previously buzzed with activity, were now just empty squares. "This can't be happening," muttered Tassar, the desperation in his voice palpable. The Dravari representative, Fail Shen, leaned forward, their elongated face dark with frustration. "I demand immediate access to the central databases. Why are we unable to retrieve any of Earth's coordinates? What is this madness?" His words were met with quiet murmurs, each one deepening the growing anxiety in the room. The fact that the human embassy had failed to check in, their fleet had vanished, and now their entire infrastructure was slipping from their grasp. It all felt like a waking nightmare. As the tension mounted, Counselor Lyre of the Shandari Union stood, his crystalline form glistening under the dim lights. "We've lost contact with every sector the humans controlled." Lyre's voice was steady, though his words carried a weight of disbelief. "This is not a simple error. This is not a malfunction." The room went still, as if each representative was finally allowing the full weight of what had happened to sink in. It wasn't just Earth that had disappeared from their radar. Earth had pulled itself out of every link, every connection, and erased every trace of its presence. No one had ever planned for this. No one had ever considered the possibility that humanity, which had long been underestimated, might possess such control. "We've been manipulated," murmured Counselor Atris Dar of the Uran Confederacy, staring at his data feed, which had frozen yet again. The humans weren't just passive participants. They were the ones pulling the strings all along. His wings fluttered in disbelief, his black eyes narrowing in realization. Tassar leaned forward, staring into the now darkened plasma display. His voice was low, but it carried across the room. "The humans, they never played by our rules. We thought they were just another small power, a nuisance perhaps, but now—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the thought. A few years ago, they had been the least of their worries, but now, the galaxy was beginning to see just how intricately Earth had woven itself into the system. "The systems, the trade routes, the military supply chains," Fail Shen said, almost to himself as he ran a diagnostic through his own interface. How long? How long were they planning this? The realization hit them all at once. Every piece of Earth's infrastructure, every small role it had played, had been part of a grand strategy. Earth had planted itself inside their very systems, influencing everything without ever making its presence truly known. It had been a slow, deliberate maneuver, and now the Council was left with a gaping hole where Earth's influence once was. "We've relied on their tech, on their data systems. Without them, our network's in shambles," Dar said quietly, his voice filled with bitter awe. "All of this, all the trade routes, all the planetary governance models, they were built on Earth's framework, and now that it's gone, everything's falling apart." In the back of the room, a holographic screen sputtered to life. It was another attempt at communication, but this one, unlike the others, seemed to be working, albeit with strange flickers and cuts in transmission. It was the emergency relay from the human government. Chancellor Damian Stewart's image, once an idle presence, now took center stage. The transmission was short, direct, and void of any comfort. "The Treaty of Galactic Integration was never ratified." Stewart's voice resonated clearly in the quiet room, his words cold and measured. "The foundational species of this council manipulated procedural records, obstructed Earth's political voice, and maintained our presence under false pretense for strategic exploitation." A stunned silence followed. It wasn't just a break in communication. It wasn't just a withdrawal. It was a calculated severance. "We were never your partners," Stewart's voice continued, his face appearing distant, unbothered. "We were always the ones in control. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving behind an echo of cold finality. Fel Shen cursed under his breath, stepping away from the display. This is a deliberate act, a power play. Earth's absence is their statement, and they've erased themselves from our networks, Atris Dar said, his voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and admiration. We can't reach them. It's not a simple communication blackout. They've pulled everything. The reality of the situation began to unfold slowly. A realization crept through the council, one that nobody wanted to admit, but that was becoming more and more undeniable. Earth had always been a hidden force, pulling strings from the shadows. They had never truly played by the council's rules. They had quietly embedded themselves into the systems they now controlled. And now, in a single, calculated move, Earth had withdrawn, leaving the galaxy to flounder without them. The room was filled with a tense silence. The reverberations of Earth's departure were already starting to ripple through the galaxy, and the Council was left grappling with the consequences. Tassar's eyes flicked nervously toward the darkened holographic screens. What do we do now? But no one had an answer. Not yet. The sudden rumble of boots against the planet's cracked Earth echoed through the comms, signaling the start of the first major clash between Earth's veterans and the Tyrical invaders. Major Kelly crouched behind a hastily constructed barricade, her breath steady as she surveyed the battlefield. The Tyrical were organized, their formations tight and symmetrical. They were used to fighting within rigid doctrines, predictable patterns that had carried them through countless battles. But the humans were anything but predictable. Ready when you are, Sergeant Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece, a hint of anticipation in her tone. Kelly scanned the horizon, her mind working through a series of calculated risks. The Tyrkal thought they understood warfare. They believed their technological edge and rigid formations would guarantee victory. But they hadn't counted on the way humans fought. They didn't follow the rules. They created chaos. Kelly's fingers twitched, signaling her team to move into position. Phase 1, execute. The first explosion shattered the silence. The ground shook beneath their feet as Tyrkal vehicles, previously undisturbed, erupted into chaos. A cloud of dirt and debris filled the air, obscuring the battlefield as human soldiers, barely visible in the distance, moved like shadows, using the terrain to their advantage. Kelly's team was already in motion, spreading out to execute their next phase of sabotage. From the Tyrkal's perspective, everything had gone wrong. The humans hadn't taken the fight to them in any conventional sense. They hadn't met them on the open battlefield where clear lines were drawn. They had infiltrated the perimeter, planting explosives on key supply lines, and now the Tyrkal couldn't even trust their own tactical systems. Get ready for round 2, Kelly ordered, her voice calm, despite the chaos surrounding them. The team moved quickly, setting up more traps, disrupting the enemy's communications. The Tyrkal, with all their technology, were no match for human ingenuity in a guerrilla war. On the Tyrkal command ship, confusion reigned. The commander barked orders, but the response from his subordinates was fractured. Alien officers scrambled to restore communication, but it was too late. The humans had already set the next trap. Kelly's squad had hacked into the enemy's internal comms network, flooding their channels with contradictory orders, creating a deadly miscommunication that crippled the Tyrkal's ability to coordinate. Phase 2, launch. The next explosion rocked the battlefield, not from any weapon, but from one of the Tyrkal's own war machines, now detonating from within. It was sabotage, pure and simple. The Tyrkal had failed to realize that their greatest strength, their reliance on rigid hierarchy and predictability, was their greatest weakness. The sounds of combat grew louder as the humans continued their assault, shifting positions as quickly as they attacked. Kelly moved through the chaos, her mind constantly adapting. She had planned for every scenario, prepared for every possible reaction the Tyrkal could have, but they were still unpredictable in their own way. Some forces tried to reorganize, while others, confused by the sudden change in tactics, were scattered across the battlefield. Lieutenant Garcia's voice rang out in her earpiece. Target locked. Ready for extraction. Hold off, Lieutenant, Kelly responded. We need to keep them off balance. This isn't just about winning this fight. It's about sending a message. The Tyrkal commander had finally understood. This was no traditional war. This was chaos. There were no defined battle lines, no clear-cut victories to claim. The humans, with all their primitive technology, had turned the fight into something else entirely, something the Tirkal couldn't fathom. Despite the confusion, the Tirkal retaliated. They launched a counterattack, but it was half-hearted, chaotic. They didn't know where the humans were or where to hit. The Earth soldiers had turned the environment into a weapon. They used every resource at their disposal: terrain, traps, and tactics that didn't fit the standard combat playbook. Mitchell Garcia, cover the rear, Kelly ordered as her team regrouped for another strike. She studied the Tirkal's command ship through her scope, her eyes narrowing as she plotted the next move. The humans weren't interested in taking control of the battlefield. They were after something far more strategic: disruption. Her team set up another ambush using old mining equipment left behind by the Confederation's initial settlers. It wasn't high-tech, but it was effective. The makeshift bombs exploded in perfect synchronization, sending a ripple of confusion through the Tirkal ranks. The alien forces, confused and rattled, attempted to form a defensive perimeter, but they were too late. The humans had already infiltrated their systems, and now the Tirkal were fighting a battle they hadn't prepared for. "This is it," Kelly muttered under her breath. "The world they know is gone." She moved quickly, directing her squad to strike at the heart of the enemy's command structure. It wasn't just about inflicting damage anymore. It was about breaking the will of the Tirkal to fight. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight in ways they couldn't understand. Now it was time to show them. The Tirkal responded in kind, attempting to regroup their forces and push back. But the humans had already made their mark. The offensive had been wild, unpredictable, and devastating. With every strike, the Tirkal lost control. Their once perfect formations began to break apart as they tried to adapt to the shifting tactics of the humans. Meanwhile, Major Kelly didn't pause. She wasn't concerned with how long the battle would last. She wasn't even worried about winning in the traditional sense. The goal was much simpler: to prove that the Tirkal's assumption of human inferiority was wrong. Earth's veterans had faced real wars, battles that were anything but predictable, and now they were showing the galaxy just how far that experience would take them. "Phase 3, execute," Kelly ordered, watching as her team moved into position. The final round of attacks began, and the Tirkal were left reeling. Their technological superiority didn't matter when they couldn't predict what the humans would do next. In the end, the Tirkal retreated. The battle for Helios 4 was far from over, but humanity had already sent a clear message. The Varaxian collective, who had watched from the sidelines, exchanged glances as they observed the aftermath of the battle. It was one thing to think humanity was primitive. It was another to face the reality that their methods, born of centuries of conflict, had just turned the tide in this galaxy-wide war. Major Kelly stood among her squad, watching as the Tirkal forces regrouped on the horizon, their lines broken, their morale shattered. She turned to her team, her voice calm but firm. "This is just the beginning. Keep them guessing." The Tirkal had learned the hard way. Humanity fought on its own terms, and they would never see it coming. General Gregory Stucker stood before the gathered council, his stance unwavering, his expression unreadable. The room was quieter than it had been in hours, an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the faint clatter of data logs on the council's laser plasma displays. Each delegate, once so assured of their power, now felt the creeping cold of a truth they had not yet fully accepted. He spoke, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. "You have been manipulated, every trade route, every military alliance, every technological advance. It was all part of a plan that has taken Earth decades to execute." The laser plasma displays flickered once, casting jagged shadows across the faces of the council members. Their eyes were wide with disbelief. They had believed Earth to be a quiet observer, a species that played by the rules, that followed the orders of the council. But now they saw the enormity of the illusion. Earth had been more than just a player. It had been the hand that moved the pieces all along. "Earth's strategy wasn't to dominate you," Stucker continued, his gaze fixed on the council. "It wasn't about control, at least not in the way you think. No, Earth's strategy was to remain indispensable, to make itself so crucial to your operations that no matter what, you would need them, and they would need nothing in return. The council members exchanged wary glances. The realization was beginning to take hold, but it felt too far-reaching, too insidious to accept fully. Earth had orchestrated its absence carefully, weaving itself into the very fabric of the council's infrastructure. It hadn't seized power, it had built dependence. While you argued and bickered over the details of governance, Stucker continued, his voice growing colder with each word, Earth quietly ensured that every system in place would collapse without them. Their technology, their military, their trade routes, they were all designed to be interwoven into your systems. They made sure you were never strong enough to act without them. One by one, the council members' faces fell, their earlier confidence shattered. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a war. It was a long game, a slow burn, and humanity had played it to perfection. Fail Shen, the Dravari representative, could barely speak. His mandibles twitched in agitation, his eyes darting to the rest of the council. This was never about equality, was it? He muttered, the words barely audible. No, Stucker replied sharply. It was never about equality. It was about being irreplaceable. As he spoke, the laser plasma displays behind him shifted to show a new set of data. Military systems, trade agreements, and communication hubs. Each system was marked with the unmistakable signature of Earth's technology, hidden, silent, but undeniable. Every battle fought, every economic decision made, Earth was always at the center of it, quietly, without ever making itself known. All of us, Lyar of the Shandari began, his tone now strained. We've been using their technology, trading on their routes. They built the networks we all depend on, and we never realized it. Exactly, Stucker replied, and Earth let you believe you were in charge. They let you think you were the ones making decisions, but all the while they were the ones pulling the strings, subtly, carefully, ensuring their presence was woven into every aspect of your lives. And now when they leave you with nothing. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. The council was starting to grasp the full scope of the betrayal. But it wasn't just betrayal. They had been played. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted by a species they had underestimated. Earth wasn't a subordinate power. It had been a silent master, and they were all puppets. Earth never sought to dominate, Stucker added, but to remain essential. They made sure you could never function without them. And when they were ready, when they had secured their place, they simply withdrew. No warning, no announcement. They erased themselves and left you to deal with the collapse. The mood in the chamber shifted. The delegates, once so sure of their control over the galaxy, now felt vulnerable, exposed. Their hands were tied. They had depended on Earth for so long, trusted its systems, relied on its resources, and now without warning, it was all gone. Counselor Varan, who had once been so confident in his species' ability to predict every move in the galaxy, stood frozen. No, he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. This cannot be true. If Earth could do this, if they could manipulate us for so long, then what else do they control? What else have they planned? It's not about control anymore, Stucker replied, his voice low. It's about survival. Earth has played the long game. They've set up the entire galaxy to rely on them, and now they're gone. They don't need you anymore. They've won. The council was reeling, but the full weight of Earth's strategy hadn't yet sunk in. The galaxy they had known was collapsing. The intricate web of trade routes, military defense systems, and communication networks that had once been the backbone of their power was now unraveling, each thread pulled by Earth's departure. No, Lyar whispered, his voice shaky. We thought we were the ones who shaped the galaxy. But it was Earth. They were the architects of our future, and we never saw it. The laser plasma displays behind Stucker now flashed with unsettling clarity. Earth's absence had triggered cascading failures across the galaxy. Each system they had built was now spiraling into disarray, unable to function without their hidden presence. The Council had never been truly in charge. Not really. Earth had merely allowed them to believe they were. The room was heavy with the realization of betrayal, and a new sense of fear began to rise. Earth hadn't disappeared out of weakness, as the Council had assumed. It had withdrawn because it had already achieved what it set out to do. It had made itself so vital, so essential to the galaxy's survival, that the Council could no longer function without it. Stucker turned and looked at the Council one last time, his expression grim. "You're not in charge anymore. You never were." The Council was silent. The pieces were all in place now, but the price of their ignorance had become painfully clear. Earth had manipulated them for decades, and now it was gone. The galaxy, once so structured, was beginning to collapse under its own weight. And in that silence, the full scope of Earth's strategy was finally understood. It had never been about power. It had been about making sure that when they were ready to leave, no one would be able to follow. The chamber was deathly silent, the air thick with tension as the final broadcast began to play. Earth's last message to the Galactic Council had been sent, unmistakably final, cutting through the airwaves with the same cold precision that had defined humanity's actions. It was the end of a chapter, a moment that carried the weight of years of calculation, patience, and quiet manipulation. The laser plasma displays flickered to life, projecting the message into the center of the room. Chancellor Damian Stewart's image appeared again, as stoic as ever. But there was something different about this message. It was no longer an announcement. This time, it was a revelation. The calm of his demeanor now felt almost unsettling, as though the weight of history was pressing down on him with every word he spoke. "Council members," Stewart began, his voice steady, unyielding. "We've come to the end of our dealings, and you have now seen what we had hoped you would. Earth has never been a subordinate species. We never needed you. What we required was a place at the table, not as equals, but as an essential force, one whose absence would be felt in every corner of the galaxy. Our position was never that of a servant, never that of a subordinate. We controlled the flow of this galaxy long before you ever understood it." The message continued, its words heavier with every passing second. Earth had orchestrated this moment, and it was clear now. The weight of their absence was not simply a withdrawal. It was a calculated and precise withdrawal, a carefully planned retreat that would make the galaxy tremble in its wake. The council members, once so confident in their roles, sat frozen, every word of Stewart's message puncturing the last remnants of their pride. "We waited," Stewart's voice echoed through the chamber, "until the moment was right. We waited for you to build your systems, your alliances, your confidence, and when you were ready, when you had made yourselves dependent, we pulled away, allowing you to see just how fragile your empire truly is." The realization hit the council like a physical blow. No longer could they pretend Earth was merely a small player in the greater game. They had been living in the shadow of humanity's control all along, too blind to see the puppet strings that had been pulling them. "There was never any illusion about equality between us," Stewart continued. "You believed we were working side by side, but we were quietly ensuring that the systems you depended on were tethered to us. And now, as you flail in the dark, as your systems unravel one by one, you begin to understand the truth. Earth was never the underdog, never the second-rate member you treated us as. We were the one constant in the fabric of your power, and now we are gone." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was no sound. No one dared speak, as if the universe itself had held its breath. The council members remained motionless, staring at the display, as the truth settled in with an almost suffocating weight. The council's attempts to salvage the situation were immediate but futile. Delegates from every species scrambled to re-establish contact with Earth. Communication channels were flooded with commands and requests for answers. But all efforts were in vain. The systems remained dead. No signals returned. The satellites Earth had built to facilitate communication with every corner of the galaxy were now inert, their signals erased, their power stripped away. The more the Council tried to reach out, the more it became clear. Earth's absence was not a glitch. It was deliberate, calculated, final. "This is not just a retreat," one of the Council members muttered under their breath. "This is a declaration. They've shown us their power, and we didn't even see it until it was too late." Accusations began to fly in the chamber as the once solidified council broke apart. Distrust spread like wildfire. Paranoia took root in every conversation. The realization was undeniable. Earth had manipulated them all. The pieces of the puzzle that had taken so long to understand finally clicked into place. Earth had orchestrated everything from the shadows, moving quietly behind the scenes, making sure no one could ever rise against it. It was always a trap, Fail Shen, the Dravari representative hissed. We were never meant to win. We were never meant to rise above them. We were merely pawns in their game. And now, Lyar, the Shandari delegate, added bitterly, we are left with nothing. We are alone, exposed, and entirely dependent on a power that no longer exists. The paranoia grew deeper as more council members began to realize the true scope of Earth's strategy. The perception of Earth as a minor dependent species had been a carefully constructed illusion, a lie so deeply embedded in the Council's collective psyche that it had been impossible to see. And now that illusion had shattered. Earth had engineered its absence as a final power play, a move that none of them could have anticipated. We cannot repair what has been broken, Councillor Vorin of the Dravari muttered, the first to voice the growing hopelessness in the room. We are on our own. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of realization. There was no coming back from this. The Council could no longer function as it had. The infrastructure Earth had built was now in ruins, and the galaxy had no way of filling the void left behind. As the Council tried desperately to come to terms with the enormity of what had happened, the broadcast continued, its message unfolding further. This is your final warning, Stewart's voice echoed coldly. Humanity was never weak. We were always in control. You should have known that. You should have seen the signs, but you didn't. And now it's too late. The laser plasma display flickered, the image of Earth's final message growing faint, its words fading into the empty silence that had filled the room. The council members, once so full of their own authority, were left with nothing but the weight of their own mistakes. Their entire existence, their authority, their control, all of it had been an illusion. And now with Earth's departure, they would have to face the consequences of their ignorance. As the display went dark, the room was left in cold, oppressive silence. The Council had failed. The galaxy had failed. And Earth, having played its hand perfectly, was gone. Forever. The chamber fell into chaos. The once steady rhythm of council meetings now reduced to frantic shouting and scrambling. The holographic displays once used for diplomatic procedures now flickered erratically, a symbolic reflection of the order being destroyed. The absence of Earth was not just a void. It was a seismic rupture, shattering the very foundation the Council had stood on for so long. We must act now, Councillor Lyre of the Shandari shouted, his voice strained with urgency. Our networks are failing, the trade routes are collapsing, and our military response units can't even communicate with each other. The humans are gone, and now, we've been complacent, Councillor Failshen of the Dravari interjected, his mandibles clicking with increasing agitation. Earth was the unseen hand, the hidden keystone that held everything together, and now it's gone, leaving us exposed. We've been playing a game, and they were the ones holding all the cards. His words cut through the panic like a sharp knife. The council members, each of them facing their own crises, were beginning to grasp the full scale of their dependence on humanity. They had known Earth was powerful, but they had never understood the depths of its influence. Without Earth's steady guidance, their carefully constructed web of power began to unravel, revealing just how fragile their alliances truly were. As the Council's internal strife escalated, accusations were thrown across the room. Trust, once a cornerstone of their diplomacy, was now in tatters. Species that had once worked together, if begrudgingly, now turned against each other, each vying for control of whatever remained of the Council's crumbling infrastructure. The laser plasma displays that had once shown the coordination of galactic efforts now blinked wildly, unable to keep up with the disorder spreading through the chamber. The displays that tracked military deployments were down, as were those monitoring economic trade routes. A few species tried to send emergency signals, but all returned with the same haunting message: no connection. It's no use, Councillor Atris Dar, the leader of the Uran Confederacy, snapped. His voice was laced with bitter realization. Earth had embedded itself too deeply in every system, every trade route, every AI protocol, every military decision. all tied to them. And now without them, we are falling apart. We need to act immediately, before it's too late, a voice from the back of the room shouted. The Krell representative, Counselor Vorn, who had been sitting quietly throughout the initial panic, now stood with a face twisted in frustration. We can't let this chaos continue. We must impose control. We must seize power from those who are too weak to manage this situation. But even as he spoke, the weight of the situation settled on everyone's shoulders. The political games that had been their lives were now irrelevant. The Council's precious balance of power was gone, and each species was left to fend for itself. The laser plasma displays flickered again, this time showing the collapsing infrastructure of the galaxy. Systems that had once been seamless now showed massive gaps, failures rippling out from Earth's absence. For the first time in a long while, no one had the answers. They only had the chaos of a galaxy on the brink of collapse. How did we not see this? Liar whispered, staring at the flickering screens. His eyes darted between the images of shattered trade routes and malfunctioning military units. How could we have been so blind? Because we didn't want to see it, Fail Shen replied, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. We were too wrapped up in our own power, too busy fighting among ourselves to see that Earth was the one holding it all together. And now look what we've done. In the back of the chamber, the representatives of the minor species looked on in horror as their governments began to fracture. Their voices, once a small part of the conversation, now echoed with the desperate cries of those who had lost everything. The panic was contagious, spreading from the higher-ranking counselors to the less influential members who had once thought they were immune to the political chaos of the more dominant species. The realization that the Council had been relying on the invisible hand of Earth was too much to bear. It was as though the entire galaxy had been living in a false reality, where Earth's absence was never truly considered. They had never truly understood the fragility of their system. Only now, as it began to fall apart, did they see the truth. Counselor Voran of the Dravari spoke up, his voice steady but filled with a quiet rage. We have been blind, he said, blind to the strings that held us all together. Earth controlled everything from the shadows, and we let them. We let them manipulate us while we fought over the scraps, never once understanding the gravity of our own dependence. The realization of betrayal sank in deeply, the final blow to the already fragile unity of the Council. There were no answers, no quick fixes. Their systems were collapsing, their alliances were failing, and most troubling of all, Earth was gone, leaving nothing but the empty shell of the once great Galactic Council. We have to make a decision, Counselor Dar, the last to speak, said quietly. His words were final, a closing statement to the unraveling of the Council's power. We can no longer pretend that the galaxy will function as it once did. The systems we built together are gone. We cannot fix this. And with that, the room fell into a heavy silence. The once proud Galactic Council, a body that had controlled the fate of the galaxy for countless cycles, was now in tatters. Its members, so certain of their power, were now left to grapple with the consequences of their own ignorance and arrogance. The age of the Council was over. The galaxy would have to find a new way forward, one that no longer relied on Earth's quiet control. The room was left in chaos, the final remains of the Council disintegrating with each passing second. As the last few delegates scrambled for control, the message of Earth's departure lingered in the air. The galaxy had been left behind, and now only the aftermath remained. The galaxy stood at a precipice. In the wake of Earth's calculated departure, everything had changed. The familiar hum of intergalactic order, the unspoken agreements, the shared resources, the diplomatic ties, had all fallen into silence. Now in the fractured halls of the Galactic Council, there was no clarity, no answers, only an endless series of questions that echoed like a low, mournful vibration. How do we move forward? Counselor Liar asked, his voice hollow as he stared at the blank laser plasma display in front of him. The once reliable stream of data, once an almost sacred tool in their galactic decisions, now offered nothing but an empty void. Earth was the core, the unseen force holding everything in place. And now we are left with nothing. The council members sat in their seats, their heads lowered in silence. It had only been a few cycles since Earth's sudden exit, yet already the weight of its absence was palpable. Their vast network, once supported by human technology and influence, now lay in ruins. Trade routes that once ran like rivers of opportunity had dried up. Military commands that had been seamless for decades now faced systemic breakdowns. And above all, the invisible threads of power that held the galaxy together were unraveling piece by piece. We cannot rebuild what was lost, Fael Shen of the Dravari murmured, his voice thick with frustration. Earth's hand was in every corner of this galaxy, from the smallest trade agreement to the largest military alliance. We were nothing without them. It's true, Counselor Dar agreed softly, but we also cannot afford to dwell on the past. Our future depends on how we face the consequences of their withdrawal. But how could they move on? How could they chart a path forward when the foundation of their galactic order had been stripped away? The answer didn't come easily. There were no simple solutions, no quick fixes. Earth's absence was not just the loss of a planet, it was the loss of a guiding force that had shaped the very structure of their civilization. The council chamber, once filled with the sound of urgent discussions and heated debates, now carried the weight of silence. Occasionally a delegate would speak, but their words seemed hollow, as though the reality of what had happened had not fully sunk in. Maybe it's time we face the truth, Counselor Atristar spoke up, the sharpness in his voice cutting through the atmosphere. We've been playing in Earth's shadow for far too long. Their withdrawal is a wake-up call, a reminder of our own fragility. Fragility, Layar repeated. I never thought I would hear that word used in this council. We all believed ourselves to be invincible, Fael Shen remarked bitterly. That's the real tragedy. We didn't just lose Earth, we lost the illusion of our own power. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For all their technological advancements, for all the vast political maneuvers they had undertaken, the Council had been dependent on Earth, on its quiet manipulation, its behind-the-scenes influence. And now that Earth had stepped back, the full extent of their dependency was painfully clear. As the hours passed and the discussions grew more heated, a few started to see the larger picture. They weren't just dealing with the absence of a powerful species, they were confronted with the truth of their own collective impotence. The galaxy, despite its grandeur, was brittle. Each empire, each power block had been held together not by strength, but by the unseen work of one species, a species that had now chosen to withdraw from the galactic stage. Liar's hand clenched into a fist as he turned toward the laser plasma display, now flashing with only fragments of outdated information. We were complicit, he said quietly. We knew Earth's influence was there, but we chose to ignore it. We took their stability for granted, and now we will pay the price. Felshin shot him a glance. Some of us were never blind to it, he said. Some of us understood the magnitude of Earth's role, but even we were caught in their web, unable to extricate ourselves from the dependence we'd allowed to grow. They knew how to hold power without ever revealing their hand. Masterful, Etristar said softly. It was brilliant, really. They never sought to conquer us. They simply let us believe we were in control, while all the while we were following their lead. They made sure we needed them, without ever making us feel beholden. Counselor Vorn of the Krell leaned forward, his voice strained. And now we face the consequences. We must make a choice. Will we attempt to rebuild what has been broken? Or will we forge a new path, one where we are not reliant on Earth, but stand on our own? The council sat in silence, each delegate lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what had been revealed was too much to bear all at once. Earth had manipulated the galaxy's systems for years, making sure that when the time came, they would be irreplaceable. And now their absence had revealed how fragile their empire truly was. One by one, the council members began to rise, their faces filled with a mix of fear and determination. There was no turning back. The galaxy would not be the same. The political systems, the alliances, even the very concept of power. Everything was in flux. Lyre looked out at the assembly, a mix of resolve and uncertainty in his eyes. We have no choice but to rebuild, he said, his voice steady now. But we must rebuild from the ground up, without the crutch of Earth's influence. If we are to survive, we must do so on our own merits. Then let it be so, Atristar said. We will rebuild, not as we were, but as we must be. And with that, the first true decision of the post-Earth galaxy was made. The Council would no longer rely on the invisible force that had once held them together. They would either rise to the challenge of independence, or they would fall, victims of their own hubris. But as the delegates filed out, the question remained, could they truly rebuild, or would Earth's absence prove to be the final blow? Only time would tell. The galaxy had begun to rebuild, but the pieces of the once mighty Galactic Council were scattered beyond repair. The echoes of Earth's withdrawal reverberated through the hollow corridors of power, leaving a vacuum that no amount of diplomacy or strategic maneuvering could fill. As the days passed, a cold reality settled in. The Council was not merely weakened, it was fractured, its future uncertain. Earth had orchestrated its disappearance with calculated brilliance, and now the galaxy was left to confront the consequences of its actions. Counselor Lyre stood alone before the laser plasma display, his fingers hovering over the buttons, yet unwilling to touch them. The screens flickered, showing the failed communications from countless systems now inoperative. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on him, the reality of what had transpired slowly sinking in. "What have we become?" he whispered to no one in particular. Fail Shen, his former ally, had moved away from the center of the chamber. His voice was tight, tinged with the despair of realization. "We were never as powerful as we thought. Earth. Earth was always the invisible force holding us together. And now, with that force gone, we are nothing but a collection of splintered factions." A deep silence hung in the air, suffocating in its intensity. It wasn't just the Council's power that had unraveled. It was their identity. The galaxy had been a carefully constructed web of interdependence, a delicate balance of military, trade, and diplomacy, and Earth had been at the center of it all, pulling the strings from the shadows, ensuring that no one empire or species ever had the upper hand. But now that their web had been torn apart, what was left? "We were always playing into their hands," Fell continued, his voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and regret. "Earth was never interested in ruling us. They just wanted us to need them, to make sure that we depended on them, without ever realizing it. And now we face the consequences." Lyre turned toward him, his face grim. "And now we face the void they left behind. The question is, can we survive it? Or is this the end?" The council chambers had become a mausoleum, a place where once powerful figures now found themselves questioning their place in the galaxy. The realization was slow but inevitable. Earth's absence was not just a loss, it was a seismic shift in the very fabric of galactic order. What was once held together by an invisible force now teetered on the brink of collapse. No one had the answers, but everyone knew they had to act before the entire structure of power came crashing down. Across the galaxy, remnants of old alliances began to crumble as species once united by Earth's quiet influence now turned on each other. The Dravari, once strategic allies of the Krell, now fought bitterly over the remnants of trade routes that Earth had so carefully nurtured. The Crescians and the Zinthar, once bound by mutual defense agreements, now eyed each other with suspicion and hostility. It was clear that without Earth's unseen hand to stabilize the galaxy, the delicate peace that had held for centuries was in danger of disintegrating. The final broadcast from Earth, when it came, was as cold and deliberate as everything else Earth had done. It was a message to the galaxy, but it wasn't a message of apology or explanation. Number It was a final confirmation of everything the Council had refused to acknowledge. Earth had never been a subordinate species. It had always controlled the flow of the galaxy, carefully pulling the strings of power without ever making its presence known. The message was simple. We were never your saviors. We were your masters. And now we step back. You are on your own. Fell watched the display in stunned silence. The words burned into him. Masters? How many of us were blind to it? Lyre clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. It was never about domination. It was about control. They let us believe we had power, just enough to keep us complacent. And now they have left us to deal with the consequences. The reality of the message set in, and the weight of it was heavier than any worship. The Council had always been a place of illusion, where power was wielded in shadows, behind closed doors. The truth was now clear. Earth had never needed to conquer the galaxy. It had only needed to make sure it remained indispensable. And they had succeeded flawlessly. Their departure had sent ripples through every corner of the galaxy, leaving each empire struggling to adapt. Where do we go from here? Fail asked, the question hanging in the air like a specter. We are fractured, weak. The galaxy is broken, and Earth has made sure we will never be the same. Lyar's voice was distant, as though he were speaking not to File, but to the universe itself. We rebuild if we can. We rebuild from the ashes of what Earth has left behind. But we do it without the illusion of power, without the quiet hand that once held us all in place. The tension in the room was thick. It wasn't just the uncertainty of the future that weighed on them. It was the realization that they had been complicit in their own downfall. The council had been blinded by their own arrogance, believing that they could maintain control, that they could keep the peace without understanding the true nature of their dependencies. They had allowed Earth to control them, to shape them, without ever asking why. As the last remnants of Earth's message faded from the laser plasma display, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The power structures that had held the galaxy together for so long were now fractured beyond repair. The Council, once the heart of the galaxy, was now nothing more than a relic of the past. And Earth's legacy, its masterful manipulation of power, would forever haunt the galaxy, a reminder of just how fragile their unity had truly been. With no more answers and only questions left, the Council could only look to the future and wonder, what happens now? Would the galaxy rise from the ashes, or would it crumble, a broken and fragmented relic of a time when Earth had silently ruled it all? The echoes of Earth's final message would reverberate for generations, leaving its mark on the galaxy's future forever. The Council had failed to see the truth when it was right in front of them. Now they would have to face the consequences.